Hello, crafty friends, and welcome back to my channel. As the leaves fall and we say farewell to the warm summer, it's time to embrace those spooky vibes. Today, I'm creating an adorable but creepy voodoo doll card, just right for Halloween. It's bold, messy, and full of sparkle, complete with glittery spider webs that set the perfect haunted backdrop. Let us take a look at the products that we'll be using today. Now, here are some fun products by Cat Scrappiness. All of these were part of last year's Halloween release. Let's start with this 3 by 4-inch stamp set. It's called Stick It To Me. It's perfect for the spooky season, featuring an adorable voodoo doll along with a bold sentiment. The coordinating dies are a great bonus. They cut out not only the voodoo doll but also the sentiment. You can even draw inspiration from the colors shown on the packaging when coloring your doll. For my background, I'll be working with two stencils. I have the jack-o'-lantern faces stencil and the spiderwebs stencils. Again, both of these are by Cat Scrappiness. And now, instead of covering the whole entire background, I will be selectively using parts of each of these stencils to add texture, interest, and extra character to our haunted scene. Let's go ahead and start with the background first. Now I'm working with a panel that measures 4 by 5¼ inches, which is slightly smaller than a standard A2 size note card. For the background, we will be doing some playful ink blending. My surface of choice is my glass mat from Glassboard Studios. This has become my go-to base because it makes the process of this ink blending so much more smoother. It allows the ink to glide beautifully, and also cleaning is super easy, which is perfect when I'm working with so many different colors and creating a background that's meant to be messy and full of energy. Now, talking about the colors, I pulled out a gorgeous combination of bright oranges, purples, blues, and pinks. You'll notice that the ink blending isn't going to be seamless or perfectly smooth. That's completely intentional here. Instead, I wanted those colors to feel patchy and scattered across the panel. That creates movement, depth, and that slightly chaotic vibe works so well for our Halloween theme. Think of it as almost a stormy sky, but with more vibrancy and an absolutely whimsical look. To push that spooky feel even further, I'll be adding in some earthy browns to ground the colors and give it a slightly aged look. And of course, no haunted background would be complete without touches of intense black around the edges. The black really frames the panel and adds that dramatic shadowy effect that makes the bright colors pop even more. By the time we are done, this panel is going to be a perfect balance of bold, vibrant energy with just the right amount of dark and eerie atmosphere to set the stage for our Halloween design. To clean my glass mat, I simply give it a quick spritz of water and wipe it down with a microfiber cloth. It's that easy. That's the reason I love using this glass mat whenever I'm ink blending, or even better, whenever I have such intense colors. Now let's move on to the stenciling part of it, which will add some really fun details to our background. I'm starting with a spiderweb stencil. To keep it steady, I like using the little Fawn magnets to hold the stencil in place while I ink blend through it. Using the same intense black ink, I added the spider webs in random spots across the panel. I didn't cover the whole stencil, just applied ink selectively so the webs appear in three different areas, giving the background a scattered look and a spooky feel. Once I was satisfied with my spider webs, next I brought in the jack-o'-lantern faces stencil. Using the same approach, I ink blended through just few parts of the stencils. So those little eerie little faces, they peek out through different spots. This layering of webs and faces really helps build the haunted Halloween atmosphere. If you'd like to give your background even more dimension, you could swap out the stenciled webs for die cut spider webs and layer them directly onto the panel. With all of the stenciling finished, it was now time to bring in some texture. For this, I chose the Fairy Dust Stencil Paste by Fawn. This paste is super sparkly. It dries almost clear but leaves behind that gorgeous shimmer that really catches the light. I paired it with a spiderweb stencil to add that extra sparkle onto our background. I wasn't too concerned about perfectly covering the stencil. Instead, I applied the paste randomly, just like I did my stenciling across the panel. The goal here is to achieve a rough, rugged texture that enhances that eerie, haunted vibe of the background rather than keeping it neat and precise. You could use any gels or pastes that you have in your stash, and it would turn out absolutely amazing. I'll carefully lift the stencil off the panel and take it straight to the sink to wash away all of that stencil paste. It's important to not let the paste dry on the stencil, palette knife, or even your glass mat since it can be tough to remove it once it sets. With that gorgeous sparkle and texture added, our background is now complete. I'll set it aside to dry and move on to creating our focal point image and the sentiment for our card. I'm going to start working on the focal point image and the sentiment for this card. For this, I have a piece of smooth white cardstock and I'll start by stamping both the little voodoo doll as well as the coordinating sentiment onto a white piece of cardstock. The stamp set is the Stick It To Me stamp, and I absolutely love how bold and quirky the designs are. They are just perfect for a spooky card like this. For stamping, I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Now, this is a pigment ink, which means it'll sit on the surface of the paper for a little longer compared to most of the dye inks, making it perfect for techniques like heat embossing. It really allows the embossing powder to stick well before we heat set it. To make sure that I get a solid impression, I stamp the image twice. I always prefer double stamping it when I know I'll be embossing it because it ensures the lines are crisp, clean, and bold. Next, I sprinkled on black embossing powder. I personally prefer using black powder over clear embossing powder on black ink because it gives such a dramatic effect. The lines look shinier, deeper, and more vibrant, which makes the stamped image pop beautifully against the background. When it's time to heat setting, I always let my heat tool warm up for a good few seconds before bringing it to the cardstock. This little step makes a huge difference. It melts the embossing powder almost instantly, and that quick melt lessens the exposure to heat, which helps prevent the paper from warping. Once the embossing was finished, I set the panel aside for about a minute or so to cool down completely. This is really important because if you start coloring too quickly while the embossing powder is still warm, you might run the risk of smudging or dulling that beautiful glossy shine. Giving it a little time to cool ensures the embossed lines stay sharp and act as perfect barriers for coloring later on. In that time, I will pick up my colors, and here I'm using my Ohuhu alcohol markers to add in those beautiful vibrant colors to our voodoo doll. Now that the image is embossed and ready, it's time to bring this voodoo doll to life with some fun colors. Now, since I wanted to keep things spooky yet playful, I decided to go with shades of bright green for the doll's body. To add more depth and glow, I bought in some neon greens for my highlights and shading. Earlier in the video, I mentioned taking inspiration from the packaging artwork, and while that version leans more rustic and muted, I chose to really lean into the vibrancy. I felt that those bold electric greens would match perfectly with that chaotic, messy, and colorful background that we created earlier. For the little details, I kept things simple but striking. The stitched heart on the doll was colored in bright, vivid red, which instantly stands out against that green body. For the button, I reached out for a vibrant purple. It not only complements the green but also ties it in nicely with the pinks and purples that peek through the background. These pops of colors are small, but they add just the right amount of contrast to make the doll feel fun, creepy, and a little mischievous. Well, unlike the background where I went with quick and splotchy blending, I really slowed down for the doll. I wanted the colors here to look smooth and seamless, so I worked in layers. Starting with the darkest shade of green, I gradually moved towards the midtones and then the light shades, blending them together as I went. I went back and forth between the markers, revisiting areas to soften harsh transitions. The goal was to avoid any crisp, dark lines and instead achieve that smooth gradient that makes the doll look more dimensional. For the pins that are stuck on the dolls, I use the same bright red that I used for the heart, which keeps the color palette cohesive while still giving those tiny details a punch of color and boldness. When it comes to coloring with alcohol markers, I usually reach out for my Uhuhu alcohol markers. They have such a wide range of beautiful, vibrant shades that work beautifully for images like these. However, when I got down to those really tiny elements, the eyes and the button details, and the pins, I switched to my Spectrum Noir Tri Blend markers. Their fine tip makes it so much more easier to get in those tiny little spaces without bleeding over the embossed lines. By the time I was done, the voodoo doll had a perfect mix of spooky charm and playful vibrancy. The greens gave it a creepy glow, while the pops of red and purple tied it back to that fun, chaotic Halloween palette background that we created for our card. Once the coloring was complete, it was time to die cut these pieces. I used the coordinating dies to cut out both the voodoo doll and the sentiment. To give them more dimension, I also cut each of those images two additional times using white cardstock. Stacking these layers adds extra depth and stability to the pieces. While you could also use foam tape for dimension, I find that multiple cardstock layers give it a more sturdier feel, especially for your card front. I adhered the layers using my Barely Art glue, or you could also use any of your favorite liquid glue. This is perfect because it allows a little wiggle room before everything sets firmly. Now, with that, we have our focal point image and the sentiment and the background, everything ready. I started planning the card assembly. Now, as I positioned the doll and the sentiment onto the panel, I realized that the background could use a bit more color and energy. To fix that, I reached out for my delusion sprays, specifically a very bright cherry red and a vibrant pink. I applied them randomly across the panel, not worrying about the fine mist or perfect coverage. Some areas have larger droplets, creating a natural splotchy effect. I absolutely love this randomness. The scattered splotches give the background that extra spooky charm and visual interest. I let this panel sit for a minute or two to dry. Unlike the stencil paste, these sprays dry relatively quickly, so it doesn't take a long time before you can move on to assembling your card. By adding these extra layers of color, the background feels more bold, messy, and perfectly matches the playful, eerie vibe of the voodoo doll. Now it's time to assemble our card. I began by attaching the background panel to a top folding white A2 size card base. To give the panel a nice lift and add some dimension, I mounted it using foam tape that really helps the card feel more dynamic and gives that lovely pop to this super spooky background. Next, I added my focal point image, which is the voodoo doll, and the sentiment using liquid glue. Now, when working with textured backgrounds like this one, it's important to be extra careful. Make sure to give the image a little extra time to settle onto the panel so it bonds properly with that textured areas. For added security, you could even place something slightly heavy on top of the images. You could use your stamp block or even keep a couple of books while the glue sets to ensure they adhere fully and stay perfectly in place. With all those steps taken care of, the card comes together beautifully, combining a vibrant, messy background with a fun dimensional focal point that really stands out. And there you have it, a spooky, fun, and vibrant Halloween card. From a messy, colorful background to a dimensional voodoo doll and a bold sentiment, every element comes together to create a card full of personality and charm. I hope this inspires you to experiment with ink blending, stenciling, and layering to make your own playful and eerie designs. All the supplies that I used to create this card project will be listed down in the description box below. Please note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.